We'll seize your house by force if we have to. That's my HOA president neighbor screaming at me in my own driveway while I'm filming her complete meltdown on my phone. Diane's waving legal papers like some deranged process server. Her face purple with rage because I committed the ultimate sin. I bought the one house in this neighborhood that never joined her precious HOA. The acrid smell of fresh asphalt from my driveway mixed with her choking floral perfume as she jabbed her manicured finger inches from my face. I don't care what your little deed says, Marcus. We will find a way. Little did she know I'd been recording everything for months. Every threat, every illegal scheme, every federal crime she was about to commit. By the time the story ends, guess who's wearing handcuffs? What would you do if your neighbor threatened to steal your house? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your HOA nightmares might be even crazier than mine. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, former military logistics coordinator who spent 8 years saving every penny for my dream house. After a brutal divorce that left me starting over, I had one simple goal. Find a place where I could breathe freely without some power-hungry neighbor telling me what color to paint my mailbox. I specifically researched properties outside of HOAs after renting in one of those communities where they tried to find me for leaving my garbage can out 20 minutes past pickup time. Yeah, 20 minutes. The smell of bureaucratic BS was stronger than week-old fish, and I swore never again. That's how I found 1247 Maple Grove Lane, a beautiful 1960s ranch house sitting on March 4th of an acre, twice the size of every other lot in the Willowbrook subdivision. The previous owner, Mrs. Chun, was this sweet 89-year-old lady who'd lived there for 40 years and told the HOA exactly where they could stick their membership applications. My kind of woman. I paid the full asking price of $340,000 just to avoid any bidding wars. When you've got cash and the seller's got stories about HOA harassment, deals happen fast. That's when I met Diane Fletcher. Picture a 52-year-old real estate agent who peaked as hall monitor in 7th grade and never recovered. Diane had been HOA president for 6 years running, which in suburban terms makes her basically Mussolini with a subscription to Better Homes and Gardens. She showed up during my final walkthrough, carrying a fruit basket, like some kind of twisted welcome wagon. Her smile looked like it was carved by someone who'd only heard smiles described secondhand. The forced cheerfulness in her voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard trying to sing karaoke. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she chirped, setting down grocery store fruit arranged like a funeral display. "I'm Diane, your HOA president. You'll obviously want to join our wonderful community association for neighborhood harmony," she said. Obviously, the way people say breathe like any other option was physically impossible. "Actually," I said, "I specifically bought this house because it's not part of the HOA. That's the whole point." The transformation was instant. Her plastic smile cracked faster than cheap paint in Arizona's sun. And suddenly, I'm looking at the real Diane Fletcher, the one who probably reports lemonade stands to code enforcement. "Well," she said, her voice dropping to Arctic temperatures. "We'll see how long that lasts." 8 hours later, the crisp sound of expensive letterhead hitting my mailbox announced Diane's first official move. The weight of legal threats felt heavier than the paper had any right to. Her HOA was demanding I install their approved mailbox, remove my unauthorized garden shed, and paint my perfectly fine blue house community compliant beige. Beige, the color of giving up on life. The letter claimed my property created visual blight, affecting neighboring home values. This from a woman whose idea of landscaping was chemical bombing every living thing into submission, leaving a yard that looked like the surface of Mars, but with sprinklers. Here's the community context that matters. Willowbrook subdivision has 47 homes total. 46 of them pay Diane $180 every month for the privilege of asking permission to change their own light bulbs. Those HOA dues had gone up 3 times in 2 years for mysterious beautification projects that somehow never beautified anything. My house was the lone holdout. The last free territory in her little kingdom of lawn enforcement and mailbox tyranny. Diane's house sat directly across the street, giving her a perfect surveillance position. I'd catch her peeking through blinds at dawn like some kind of suburban Stasi agent. The other neighbors seemed nice enough when Diane wasn't around, but they all had that beaten-down look of people who've learned not to make eye contact with the principal. Mrs. Rodriguez next door would wave from her garden, then glanced nervously toward Diane's house, like she was committing a crime. But here's what I didn't know yet. This wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics or property values. This was about money, big money. And Diane Fletcher was about to show me just how far she'd go to get it. Diane wasted zero time declaring war on my peaceful existence. Within a week of that letter, city code enforcement showed up at my door like I was running a meth lab instead of just owning a house. Apparently, someone had filed multiple complaints about various violations on my property. The inspector, a tired-looking guy named Rodriguez, who clearly had better things to do, walked around my yard with his clipboard, looking increasingly confused. "Sir, I'm not seeing any violations here. Your property is actually in better shape than most of the neighborhood." "Let me guess," I said. "Anonymous complaint?" "Multiple anonymous complaints," he sighed, the resignation in his voice suggesting this wasn't his first Diane Fletcher rodeo. "All from the same email address. All filed within 20 minutes of each other." He didn't say it was Diane, but his meaningful glance toward her house across the street said everything. The next Saturday morning at exactly 10 a.m., I'm out mowing my lawn. Completely reasonable time, completely reasonable activity. The satisfying hum of my mower cutting through grass was almost therapeutic until I noticed Diane marching across the street with her phone pressed to her ear, like she was calling in an airstrike. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers knocked on my door. Noise complaint. At 10:15 a.m. on a Saturday for mowing my lawn. At this point, I'm wondering if Diane thinks grass grows by magic or if homeowners are supposed to use tiny scissors like some kind of suburban Edward Scissorhands. "Ma'am," the younger officer was explaining to Diane when I walked outside, 10 a.m. on weekends is perfectly legal for lawn maintenance. Actually, most noise ordinances don't even kick in until 11 p.m. Diane's face was turning that special shade of red you see on overripe tomatoes and people who've realized they've made complete fools of themselves in public. It's about community courtesy. Decent people don't make noise before noon on weekends. While this circus was happening, Diane had called an emergency HOA meeting for that very evening. The flyers went out faster than gossip at a church potluck, declaring a neighborhood crisis that required immediate community action. I half expected her to declare martial law and demand tribute from neighboring subdivisions. But here's where I started getting smart instead of just getting mad. See, 8 years in military logistics teaches you something valuable. Documentation beats confrontation every single time. I started researching property law like my freedom depended on it, which apparently it did. That's when I discovered something that made me smile wider than a kid on Christmas morning. I remembered my real estate agent mentioning something about grandfathered rights during closing. So, I dug into the county records. My property was built in 1962 and the HOA wasn't formed until 1987. This meant my house had special protection under property law. It existed before the HOA, so they had zero legal authority over it. Basically, Diane had as much power over my property as a mall security guard has over NASA. While Diane was busy organizing her little emergency meeting, I was installing a security camera system. Nothing fancy, just 4 cameras covering all angles of my property. The crisp click of the mounting brackets felt like building my own fortress of truth. And every screw I tightened was another nail in Diane's harassment coffin. The mini twist came Tuesday morning when I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Diane's HOA was claiming my driveway was non-conforming to community standards and demanding I replace it with approved materials within 30 days or face legal action. My driveway, the same. Driveway that had been there since the Johnson administration and had probably seen more American history than most monuments. But instead of getting angry, I got creative. I researched what materials would actually improve my property value and went completely nuclear. I replaced my old concrete driveway with premium permeable pavers that cost $8,000 and looked like something from a luxury resort. The kind of eco-friendly upgrade that makes environmentalists weep with joy and property values jump like caffeinated kangaroos. Then I tackled her complaint about my unauthorized garden shed. A little more digging revealed it wasn't unauthorized at all. It was grandfathered in with the original property. But rather than just point that out, I had it professionally painted and converted into a beautiful workshop that looked better than most people's actual houses. The sound of my neighbors' jaws hitting the pavement was almost audible when they saw the improvements. Mrs. Rodriguez peeked over our shared fence and whispered, "It looks amazing, but won't Diane be furious?" Probably, I said, spreading fresh mulch around my new native plant landscaping. The therapeutic crunch under my boots felt like victory with every step. But what's she going to complain about? That my property looks too good? That evening, I filed my own formal complaints with the city about Diane's harassment pattern, false noise complaints, frivolous code enforcement calls, and abuse of authority. 3 separate departments, 3 paper trails, 3 officials who were getting tired of Diane's nonsense. The community reaction was telling. Several neighbors started finding excuses to walk past my house. Clearly impressed by the improvements, the young couple from the corner lot stopped to ask about my contractor. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me homemade cookies, a small act of rebellion in Diane's surveillance state. But the best part, Diane's emergency HOA meeting had backfired spectacularly. Word got back to me that several board members had questioned why they were calling emergency meetings about a property that wasn't even in their HOA. The Emperor's new clothes were starting to look pretty threadbare. Diane's response to my property improvements was like watching someone lose their mind in slow motion. If she thought beautiful landscaping and a premium driveway would make me back down, she clearly didn't understand the first thing about psychological warfare. Her next moves proved she was getting desperate. And desperate people make stupid mistakes. First, she tried to get my home business permit revoked. See, I run tech consulting from my home office, completely legal with proper permits. But suddenly, the city received concerned citizen reports about commercial activity in a residential zone. The smell of bureaucratic paperwork was getting thicker than morning fog as officials showed up to investigate my terrible crime of answering emails from home. The city inspector looked around my home office, 1 desk, 1 computer, 0 customers visiting, and basically laughed. Ma'am, if working from home was illegal, we'd have to arrest half the neighborhood. But this little adventure taught me something valuable about harassment law that I'd read about during my military days. When someone uses their official position to systematically abuse private citizens, it's called acting under color of law, and it's a federal crime with serious prison time attached. Diane wasn't done. She organized what she called a community safety patrol that just happened to circle my property every 2 hours like some kind of suburban surveillance squad. Picture this. Diane and 2 other HOA members walking past my house at scheduled intervals, clipboards in hand, taking notes about my activities. I started timing them. 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, 2 p.m., more regular than a Swiss watch and about twice as annoying. Then came the pet complaints. 3 separate reports filed with animal control about my unleashed aggressive pets disturbing the peace. Problem was, I don't have any pets. Not a dog, not a cat, not even a goldfish. When animal control showed up, the officer just stared at my pet-free property and asked, "Are we talking about invisible animals here?" Because I left my ghost-busting equipment in my other truck. But Diane's masterpiece was the petition. She went door to door collecting signatures demanding action against my non-conforming lifestyle and negative impact on community values. What exactly was my non-conforming lifestyle? Having nice landscaping while being unmarried, working from home, breathing without her written permission. That's when I started finding my real allies in this neighborhood. Tom Bradley, a former HOA board member who'd quit in disgust 2 years earlier, knocked on my door one evening with a bottle of beer and some very interesting stories. "Marcus," he said, settling into my porch chair, "you need to know what you're really dealing with here." The bitter taste of his IPA matched the bitter truth he was about to share. Tom revealed that Diane had a history of targeting anyone who didn't fit her perfect suburban vision. Elderly residents, minorities, single parents, military families. She forced the Rodriguez family to remove their beautiful rose garden. Tom claimed the thorns were safety hazards. Mrs. Bianist Chen got cited monthly for unkempt yard, even though her garden was featured in the local newspaper. 3 families have sold their homes specifically to escape Diane's harassment. Mrs. Rodriguez finally opened up, too, admitting she'd been living in fear for years. She threatened foreclosure proceedings over safety violations. She whispered, glancing nervously toward Diane's house. Said my kids' bicycles on the lawn were attractive nuisances that could get someone hurt. Then came the water leak incident that changed everything. I'm in the middle of an important client video call when city emergency crews arrived. Sirens blaring, claiming there was a major water leak from my property, threatening neighboring foundations. The crew spent 2 hours searching while I explained to my client why municipal workers were creating their own personal earthquake outside my window. No leak found. But here's the interesting part. Someone had been messing with my water meter. Fresh scratches on the metal cover, disturbed soil around the access point. My newly installed security cameras hadn't captured the meter area, but they did catch something else. Diane's husband, Gary, sneaking around my backyard at 2:30 a.m. 3 nights earlier. That footage was like striking gold in a cryptocurrency boom. There's Gary, clear as day, skulking through my yard with a flashlight, checking my utilities, and generally acting like a discount private investigator who learned surveillance techniques from watching too much CSI. The motion-activated spotlights I'd installed caught him like a deer in headlights, literally. His startled expression was absolutely priceless. I filed trespassing charges the next morning. Gary claimed he was checking for water leaks as a concerned neighbor, but the police weren't buying what he was selling. Neither was his lawyer, apparently, because Gary accepted a plea deal faster than you can say criminal mischief. The community reaction was shifting in my favor, like dominoes falling in slow motion. My security camera footage had somehow found its way to the neighborhood WhatsApp group, and suddenly people were asking uncomfortable questions about their HOA president's midnight surveillance operations. Mrs. Rodriguez started bringing me cookies regularly, her small act of rebellion against the surveillance state. Anonymous notes of support appeared in my mailbox, and 3 neighbors privately asked for my lawyer's contact information. But the best development was watching Diane's emergency meeting strategy backfire completely. Her latest meeting to discuss the ongoing security threat drew exactly 4 people. Herself, Gary, and 2 board members who spent most of the time questioning why they were hosting a crisis meeting about invisible pets and non-existent water leaks. With Gary's trespassing conviction on the books, I thought maybe Diane would dial back the crazy. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Instead of backing down, she went completely nuclear. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about neighborhood control anymore. This was about something much bigger and much more dangerous. Her first nuclear option was claiming my property was abandoned and filing paperwork for adverse possession. Yes, you heard that right. She tried to legally steal my house by claiming I wasn't living there. The audacity was breathtaking, like claiming the sun doesn't exist while standing in broad daylight. I was literally mowing my lawn when the sheriff delivered the papers. Then she went after my insurance. Multiple anonymous complaints flooded my homeowner's insurance company about hazardous conditions on my property. Claims included aggressive dogs that didn't exist, structural damage that wasn't there, and attractive nuisances that apparently posed grave threats to the community. The insurance investigator who showed up looked more confused than a tourist in Times Square. "Sir," he said, walking around my perfectly maintained property. "In 20 years of doing this job, I've never seen such a coordinated complaint campaign against a single property. This is unusual." That's when I started connecting dots that painted a much darker picture. Late nights researching public records revealed that Diane's Real Estate LLC had been buying distressed properties throughout the area. The pattern was disturbing. Homeowner faces harassment campaign. Homeowner gets desperate. Homeowner sells cheap. Diane's company swoops in for 40 to 60% profit margins. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Janet Walsh, a former neighbor who'd moved to Arizona, contacted me after hearing about my situation through military family networks. The weight of her revelation hit me like a freight train loaded with truth. "Marcus," she said over video call, "Diane used the exact same playbook on us in 2020. My husband was deployed and she targeted us specifically because military families are vulnerable." Janet's documentation was incredible. Months of harassment, false complaints, and threats, all building toward forced sale. The familiar taste of military coffee turned bitter as I realized how calculated this all was. Janet revealed that Diane had a special hatred for military families, elderly residents, and single parents. Anyone she perceived as vulnerable or different. Her harassment campaigns weren't random acts of suburban tyranny. They were systematic targeting of people she thought couldn't fight back. Then came the attempted break-in that changed everything. My security system exploded at 2:47 a.m. with motion alerts from every camera. Someone in dark clothing and a ski mask was trying to break into my garden shed using bolt cutters on the lock. The metallic snap of cutting tools echoed through the night air like gunshots. Police arrived within 8 minutes, but the intruder had vanished into the darkness. Nothing was stolen. The shed lock was cut, but everything inside was untouched. They weren't looking to steal anything. They were looking for something specific or trying to plant something. That something showed up the next morning. As I was leaving for my morning run, I spotted what looked like drug paraphernalia planted near my back door. Small baggie, some suspicious-looking items, positioned perfectly where Diane would discover them during her regular morning power walks around the neighborhood. The items were obviously planted, too clean, too perfectly positioned, and completely out of place on my meticulously maintained property. I didn't touch anything. Instead, I called the police immediately and provided security footage showing the exact time the items appeared. Sometime between the break-in attempt and dawn, the investigating officer's expression shifted from routine to very serious when he realized what we were dealing with. "This is evidence planting," he said grimly, carefully photographing everything before collection. "Someone's trying to frame you. That's not just harassment anymore. That's felony territory." The community awakening was like watching people emerge from a decade-long fog. Janet's testimony spread through the neighborhood WhatsApp group faster than gossip at a high school reunion. Tom Bradley confirmed similar patterns with 2 other families who'd been forced out. Mrs. B.R. Rodriguez finally admitted Diane had threatened foreclosure proceedings over completely fabricated safety violations. But here's what really opened my eyes to Diane's financial motivation. She needed my property for a reason. Deep diving into county records revealed her real estate LLC owed $340,000 in back taxes. Her beautification projects were actually methods to inflate property values for refinancing schemes. The HOA reserve fund had been mysteriously depleted, and several neighbors were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about where their monthly dues were actually going. The pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle made of criminal evidence. Diane wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a systematic property acquisition scheme, using harassment to force sales, then flipping houses for massive profits. My property wasn't just an annoyance to her. It was a missing piece in a much larger financial puzzle. The smell of desperation was getting stronger than week-old fish, and Diane's increasingly reckless behavior suggested she was running out of time and options. When criminals get cornered, they make mistakes. I was about to document every single one of them. The war had escalated beyond neighborhood disputes. This was organized crime wearing a suburban disguise, and I was sitting on enough evidence to bring down the whole operation. Everything changed the night I was organizing Janet's evidence boxes and found a document that made my blood run cold. Buried in her harassment paperwork was a reference to something called the Master Development Agreement, a document I'd never heard of, but apparently held the key to understanding Diane's entire operation. I spent the next 3 days at the county recorder's office, digging through dusty filing cabinets that smelled like old paper and broken dreams. What I found in those original 1987 HOA formation documents was a hidden clause that explained everything. Future expansion rights giving the HOA first right of refusal on any non-member property sales. The legal language was deliberately confusing, but the intent was crystal clear. This clause didn't apply to current owners like me, but it would kick in the moment I tried to sell. Diane wasn't just trying to force me out for kicks. She was positioning herself to legally steal my property the second I cracked under pressure. But that discovery was nothing compared to the financial bombshell waiting in public tax records. Diane's real estate LLC didn't just owe back taxes. It owed $340,000 and was facing imminent foreclosure. Her beautification projects weren't about community improvement. They were desperate attempts to inflate property values for refinancing schemes that were about to collapse. The HOA Reserve Fund told an even darker story. What should have been $180,000 in accumulated dues had somehow shrunk to less than $15,000. Simple math revealed that Diane had been systematically draining community funds to prop up her failing real estate ventures. She wasn't just harassing neighbors, she was embezzling from them. Tom Bradley's evening visit with a manila folder full of evidence confirmed my worst suspicions. The bitter taste of betrayal filled the air as he spread financial documents across my kitchen table. "I saved these before I quit the board," he explained. Diane was diverting emergency repair money to her personal real estate investments. When board members questioned the expenses, she threatened lawsuits and forced resignations. The smoking gun was a series of emails between Diane and Pinnacle Development Corporation discussing neighborhood revitalization. The correspondence was damning. Explicit discussions of removing obstacles to development approval, references to pressure campaigns, and community solutions. The timeline showed her harassment of me began exactly 3 days after signing a development deal worth $2.8 million. Here's where the pieces snapped together like a master criminal's confession. Diane had partnered with developers to rezone our entire neighborhood for mixed-use commercial development. Strip malls, office buildings, the full suburban nightmare package. But the deal required unanimous participation from all properties, including mine. My house wasn't just an annoyance. It was the keystone that could collapse her entire financial house of cards. Without my property, the development deal would fail. Pinnacle would demand their advanced money back, and Diane's over-leveraged empire would crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Every harassment incident, every false complaint, every midnight surveillance mission, it was all carefully orchestrated to force me into selling. The other families who'd fled the neighborhood weren't random victims. They were strategic removals, clearing the path for development. But Diane had made one crucial mistake in her criminal mastermind planning. She'd assumed I was just another target who would break under pressure. She'd never considered that someone might fight back with documentation, legal knowledge, and the patience to let her destroy herself. The power dynamic had completely shifted. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was sitting on evidence of multiple felony offenses, including embezzlement, mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Diane's desperation suddenly made perfect sense. She was facing financial ruin and possible federal prison time if her scheme collapsed. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. But she was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to run a criminal enterprise against someone who understands both military strategy and the power of patience. The weight of evidence boxes in my home office felt like ammunition for the battle ahead, and the sweet smell of justice was finally overpowering the stench of corruption. Time to go from defense to offense. With evidence of Diane's criminal enterprise spread across my dining room table, I realized this was bigger than one crazy HOA president. This was organized crime in suburban clothing. But taking down a systematic operation required systematic planning, and 8 years of military logistics had taught me exactly how to coordinate a multi-front assault. First, I needed serious legal firepower. Janet Walsh connected me with her attorney, David Chun, no relation to my house's previous owner, but equally unimpressed with HOA tyranny. Chun specialized in something I'd never heard of, but was about to become very familiar with: RICO cases. Turns out when harassment involves mail fraud, wire fraud, and systematic property theft, it qualifies for federal racketeering charges, the kind that come with mandatory minimum sentences and asset forfeit. Marcus Chin explained during our first meeting, what Diane's running isn't just harassment, it's a criminal enterprise. RICO was designed for exactly this kind of systematic fraud. The satisfying weight of federal law was about to come down on Diane's operation like a sledgehammer hitting a house of cards. We assembled a legal dream team that would make corporate criminals sweat. Real estate attorney Sarah Martinez joined to handle the development contract violations. The pro bono legal clinic at the law school provided support for other affected neighbors. Chun brought in a forensic accountant who specialized in embezzlement cases and had a track record of turning financial criminals into federal inmates. The evidence compilation phase felt like building the world's most satisfying jigsaw puzzle. Every harassment incident got time-stamped, categorized, and cross-referenced. Security footage was edited into a comprehensive timeline that told the story better than any Hollywood thriller. Financial records revealed not just $180,000 in missing HOA funds, but a pattern of systematic theft dating back 4 years. Mrs. Rodriguez and Tom Bradley provided sworn affidavit that read like war crimes testimony. Other neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up suddenly found their courage when they realized they weren't alone. The community meeting at my house was the first time many of these people had gathered without fear. And watching them share their stories was like watching prisoners realize the jail door had been open all along. But the real breakthrough came when we expanded our investigation beyond Willowbrook. Chin's connections revealed that Diane's operation wasn't unique. Similar schemes were running in 3 other subdivisions across the county. We weren't just building a case. We were uncovering a regional criminal network that had been flying under the radar for years. The financial investigation hit pay dirt when our forensic accountant traced HOA money directly to Diane's personal accounts. Luxury car purchases during emergency fund periods. Vacation home down payments coinciding with special assessments. A paper trail so obvious it was like she'd been begging to get caught. Our legal strategy was beautiful in its simplicity. Attack from every possible angle simultaneously. Criminal charges through the district attorney's office. Federal RICO case through the FBI. Civil lawsuit for damages and restitution. Professional license complaints with the State Real Estate Commission. IRS whistleblower complaint for tax evasion on embezzled funds. It was legal warfare, and we had enough ammunition to level a small city. Community organizing turned my harassment nightmare into a neighborhood awakening. Door-to-door conversations revealed widespread dissatisfaction that had been festering for years. The anonymous tip line we established brought forward evidence I never could have found alone. People started sharing stories that painted a picture of systematic intimidation going back nearly a decade. The technical preparation phase was where my military background really shone. Professional video documentation of every piece of evidence, expert witness recruitment from forensic accounting, real estate appraisal, and legal specialization fields. Media strategy development for maximum public exposure. Cloud backup systems in 3 different locations because criminals sometimes get desperate enough to destroy evidence. But here's the beautiful part. Diane had no idea what was coming. She was still operating under the assumption that I was an isolated target who would eventually break. She didn't know about Janet Walsh's evidence, the federal investigation, or the fact that half her neighbors were now documenting her every move. The timing strategy was crucial. City Council had scheduled a public hearing on the development proposal, which meant maximum public visibility. Media contacts through veteran support networks were interested in the military family harassment angle. Everything would coordinate for one massive revelation that would expose the entire criminal enterprise simultaneously. Shin explained the legal concept that would become Diane's downfall. When someone systematically violates federal law using mail and wire communications, every single incident becomes a separate federal felony. Diane's harassment campaign had generated enough criminal charges to put her away for decades. As I looked at the evidence boxes stacked in my home office, breathing in the smell of organized justice mixed with fresh coffee from our late-night strategy sessions, I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. This was about stopping a predator who had been terrorizing vulnerable families for years. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, I was the one with all the weapons. Diane's desperation was becoming as obvious as a neon sign in a blackout. With her development deal hanging by a thread and federal investigators closing in, though she didn't know about that part yet, her tactics escalated from annoying to downright criminal. If I thought Gary sneaking around my backyard was bad, I was about to discover what real desperation looked like. Her first Hail Mary was attempting to fast-track city condemnation proceedings against my property. Suddenly, my perfectly maintained house was supposedly a public health hazard, requiring immediate municipal intervention. The paperwork moved through City Hall faster than gossip through a church potluck, which told me Diane had been making some very expensive phone calls to the right people. But that was just the warm-up act. Next came the EPA complaints. Multiple reports claiming my property contained environmental hazards that threatened groundwater and soil safety. Federal environmental investigators showed up in full hazmat gear, expecting to find toxic waste dumps and chemical spills. What they found was the most environmentally responsible landscaping in the neighborhood, and a homeowner who was getting very tired of explaining why his property kept generating false emergency calls. The internet sabotage was petty, even by Diane's standards. My business internet service mysteriously got disconnected after reports of unauthorized commercial use violating residential service agreements. 3 days of fighting with customer service revealed that someone had filed detailed complaints claiming I was running a server farm from my basement. The customer service rep sounded as confused as I felt. "Sir, according to this complaint, you're allegedly hosting illegal gambling websites and Bitcoin mining operations. Do you even know what Bitcoin mining is?" While I was dealing with digital warfare, Diane launched a ground campaign against local businesses. Suddenly, my regular coffee shop, grocery store, and even the gas station started giving me weird looks. Turned out she'd been spreading rumors that I was under federal investigation and businesses that served me might face regulatory scrutiny. The barista at my usual coffee place whispered, "I don't know what you did, but that lady with the perfect hair came in here threatening boycotts if we kept serving you." The sabotage escalated to actual property damage when my sprinkler system mysteriously malfunctioned at 3 a.m., flooding my basement with enough water to make Noah nervous. Emergency plumbers found that someone had deliberately damaged the main water line. Professional work that required specific tools and knowledge. The smell of sewage backup mixed with my growing rage as I realized Diane was no longer playing games. Delivery trucks started reporting incorrect addresses with suspicious frequency. Packages consistently got misdirected, delayed, or flat-out disappeared. My mail carrier admitted that someone had been calling the post office claiming my house was abandoned and mail should be returned to sender. Meanwhile, anonymous complaints filed with the IRS claimed I was hiding unreported business income because apparently working from home legally was somehow tax evasion in Diane's twisted logic. The car vandalism was the final straw. For slashed tires in my own driveway, captured in beautiful high definition by my security cameras. But here's where Diane's desperation betrayed her. The footage clearly showed her husband, Gary, creeping around my car at 2 a.m. with a knife, looking about as subtle as a rhinoceros in a ballet class. But Diane's nuclear option was the bribery campaign. Mrs. Rodriguez came to me shaking, clutching an envelope containing $5,000 in cash and a typed note offering payment for signing a complaint against me. She said it was just about property values. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, "But I know what this really is." Tom Bradley got a similar offer, a consulting fee to recant his statements about HOA financial irregularities. Even the city inspector, who'd found no violations on my property, was approached with an envelope full of cash to discover some problems during a follow-up visit. Every bribery attempt was reported to authorities and documented because apparently Diane thought local officials were as corrupt as she was. The smear campaign went digital when Facebook posts started appearing claiming I was dangerous and unstable. Flyers appeared on car windshields throughout the neighborhood warning about criminal activity at my address. She even tried contacting my ex-wife with false allegations that could affect my custody arrangement with my daughter. That crossed a line that turned my anger into something much colder and more focused. While all this chaos swirled around me, I maintained strategic silence. Every incident got documented, every piece of evidence got preserved, and every criminal act got reported to the appropriate authorities. FBI white-collar crime investigators were building a file that would make Al Capone's tax evasion case look like a parking ticket. The community pressure was reaching a breaking point. Several neighbors received threatening letters about association with me. Diane imposed a special HOA assessment on all members for a legal defense fund, essentially making her victims pay for their own persecution. Fear tactics intensified as she sensed control slipping away like sand through her perfectly manicured fingers. But here's what Diane didn't understand. Desperate people make mistakes, and I was documenting every single one. Federal investigators love criminals who provide their own evidence. And Diane was building a case against herself more efficiently than any prosecutor ever could. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for her to walk into it. Diane's final descent into complete criminal madness was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Horrifying, but impossible to look away from with her bribery attempts failing and her financial empire crumbling. She pulled out tactics so desperate and illegal that even her own supporters started backing away like she had a contagious disease. Her nuclear option was filing an emergency restraining order claiming I had stalked and threatened her. The paperwork read like bad fiction, describing late-night phone calls I never made, threatening confrontations that never happened, and aggressive behavior that existed only in her increasingly detached from reality imagination. The irony was thicker than molasses. The woman who'd been systematically stalking me for 8 months was now claiming to be the victim. The false domestic violence charges were her masterpiece of projection. Diane called 911 hysterically, claiming I'd threatened her with a weapon during a violent confrontation in her driveway. Police arrived at my house to find me on a video conference with clients in 3 different time zones, providing the most ironclad alibi in harassment history. The body camera footage of Diane's story, changing every 30 seconds, was comedy gold. First, I threatened her with a gun, then a knife, then apparently just aggressive hand gestures. She demanded my security cameras be removed, claiming they violated her privacy rights by surveilling her property. The legal logic was stunning. The cameras that had caught her husband trespassing and her self-planting evidence were somehow the real crime here. It was like a bank robber complaining that security cameras violated their right to steal money privately. The Child Protective Service's complaints were when I knew Diane had completely lost whatever remained of her sanity. False reports claiming I was an unfit father based on my criminal lifestyle and dangerous living conditions. CPS investigators showed up expecting to find a drug den and instead discovered a 12-year-old girl doing homework in one of the safest, most well-maintained homes in the neighborhood. The social worker actually apologized for wasting my time and noted the complaint for potential prosecution. But the police report that sealed Diane's fate was her claiming I threatened her with a weapon while she was peacefully walking past my property. Officers arrived expecting domestic violence and found me in my backyard grilling burgers for my daughter's weekend visit. The timestamp on my security footage showed Diane hadn't been within 100 yards of my property all day. Her story crumbled faster than a stale cookie, and the officer's patience finally ran out. "Ma'am," the senior officer explained with barely contained frustration, "this is the 7th false report you filed this month. False police reports are a felony, and we're documenting a pattern of harassment that goes far beyond neighborly disputes." The community-breaking point came when 3 more families announced they were selling rather than endure another day of Diane's increasingly unhinged behavior. The HOA board members who hadn't already resigned began submitting their own resignations faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship. Mrs. Rodriguez finally went public with years of documented harassment, and the neighborhood WhatsApp group became an evidence-sharing network that made WikiLeaks look amateur. Diane's development deal partner, Pinnacle Development, withdrew from the project, citing community instability and regulatory concerns. The smell of corporate panic was stronger than burnt coffee as they realized their business partner was about to become a federal defendant. Her real estate LLC faced foreclosure on multiple properties, and the personal bankruptcy filing revealed the stunning scope of her financial desperation. Meanwhile, I maintained my normal routine while coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies for what they called synchronized action. Federal prosecutors were building a RHO case. State investigators were pursuing real estate fraud charges. Local police were filing harassment and false reporting charges. It was like watching a legal symphony with Diane as the unwitting star performer. The attempted frame-up was Diane's final masterpiece of criminal stupidity. She planted stolen merchandise in my garbage before pickup day, then made an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at my address. Police arrived expecting to find evidence of theft, and instead found planted goods that my security cameras had recorded her placing there. The footage was so clear you could see her checking over her shoulder like a cartoon villain. Felony charges for evidence tampering and false reporting were filed that same afternoon. Her lawyer, what was left of her legal representation after the others fled, advised immediate plea negotiations. But Diane was too far gone to listen to reason, screaming about conspiracies and frame jobs while providing more evidence for additional charges. Her support network collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The HOA attorney withdrew from representing the organization. Her real estate broker suspended her pending ethics investigations that were expanding faster than her legal troubles. Her husband, Gary, filed for separation, citing criminal exposure and concerns for family safety. Even her financial advisor revealed she'd liquidated retirement accounts to pay for legal fees and private investigators. The surveillance revelation was the cherry on top of her criminal sundae. The private investigator she'd hired admitted to illegal surveillance activities, including photographing my daughter at school. Stalking. Charges involving a minor carried mandatory minimum sentences that made her other crimes look like jaywalking tickets. The final evidence was captured when Diane, in her complete desperation, attempted to break into my home while I was at my daughter's school play. Security footage showed her trying multiple windows and doors, clearly attempting to plant additional evidence that would somehow salvage her collapsing scheme. Police arrested her in my backyard at 11:47 p.m., flashlight in hand, carrying a bag of items that would have made Al Capone blush. The charges kept piling up: breaking and entering, criminal threats, stalking, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The monthly city council meeting on November 15th started like any other boring municipal gathering. Folding chairs squeaked under the weight of residents who'd rather be anywhere else. Fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune, and the air conditioning wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. What nobody knew except me and my legal team was that this sleepy Tuesday evening was about to become the most explosive council meeting in city history. I'd requested a spot on the agenda for community safety concerns, which sounded innocent enough that nobody paid attention. Diane attended, expecting to present her side of what she still believed was a simple neighborhood dispute. She sat in the front row wearing her best suburban armor, perfectly pressed blazer, regulation HOA smile, and the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything. Local media was present thanks to my veteran advocacy group connections. Channel 7's crime reporter had gotten a tip about significant developments in ongoing HOA corruption investigation. The nervous energy crackling through the packed room felt like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. When Council President Martinez called my name, I walked to the podium carrying 3 bankers' boxes that weighed more than most people's annual tax returns. The room's attention shifted from polite boredom to intense curiosity as I arranged my evidence like a prosecutor preparing for the trial of the century. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady as bedrock. "I'd like to address systematic criminal harassment, embezzlement, and federal racketeering occurring right here in our community." The collective gasp was audible. Diane's perfect smile cracked like old paint as the large screen behind me displayed a timeline that looked like something from an FBI presentation. 8 months of documented incidents, each one time-stamped and categorized, painting a picture of organized crime hiding behind suburban respectability. "This is security footage from October 23rd, I announced as the screen showed crystal-clear video of Diane planting drug paraphernalia near my back door. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as she jumped to her feet, like someone had electrocuted her chair. "This is all lies and manipulation," she screamed, her voice cracking like a teenager caught sneaking out. "He fabricated this evidence. He's bribing officials. Arrest him right now." Council President Martinez banged his gavel like he was driving railroad spikes. "Ma'am, please sit down and let the presentation continue." But the bombshells were just beginning. Financial records flashed across the screen showing $180,000 in missing HOA funds traced directly to Diane's personal accounts. Email correspondence with Pinnacle Development revealed the conspiracy to force property sales for commercial development. Audio recordings of bribery attempts played through the chamber's sound system with the clarity of a confession booth. The witness parade was devastating. Tom Bradley presented documentation of systematic financial fraud dating back 4 years. Janet Walsh appeared via video link from Arizona. Her testimony about targeted harassment of military families hitting the room like a gut punch. Mrs. Rodriguez took the podium with tears streaming down her face, describing years of intimidation that had turned her own home into a prison. "She threatened foreclosure if my children left bicycles on our own lawn," Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed. "Said my rose garden was a community safety hazard. I've been afraid to even water my flowers without her permission." That's when Police Chief Williams stood up from the back of the room. The gravity in his voice could have flattened mountains. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing tonight is the culmination of a 6-month joint investigation involving local police, state prosecutors, and federal agencies." FBI agent Sarah Chun stepped forward, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "We've been building a federal RICO case based on evidence provided by Mr. Marcus and corroborated by multiple victims. Mrs. Fletcher is facing charges of embezzlement, mail fraud, conspiracy, harassment, stalking, and evidence tampering." The room went silent, except for the sound of Diane's world collapsing. Her face had gone white as fresh snow, and she was gripping her purse like it was the last life preserver on a sinking ship. But I saved the best for last. "Before I conclude," I said, my voice carrying the weight of 8 months of documented hell, "I'd like you to hear this recorded phone conversation from last Tuesday." Diane's voice filled the silent chamber. That little girl won't be safe anywhere if her father doesn't cooperate. Military brats learn discipline one way or another. The collective gasp this time sounded like air being sucked out of the room. Several council members looked physically sick. Someone in the gallery shouted, "Monster!" and the crowd erupted in angry murmurs that sounded like a lynch mob warming up. Diane completely lost it. He forced me to say that this is entrapment. You're all conspiring against me. I built this community. I protected property values. I made this neighborhood what it is. Yes, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a knife through butter. You made it a place where families live in fear, where elderly residents get harassed into selling, and where military families get targeted because you think they're vulnerable. You made it a criminal enterprise. Police officers moved toward Diane as Council President Martinez announced, "Mrs. Fletcher, you have outstanding warrants for harassment, stalking, embezzlement, evidence tampering, and criminal threats against a minor." The handcuffs clicking around Diane's wrists provided the most satisfying sound I'd heard in 8 months. As they led her away, still screaming about conspiracies and frame jobs, the packed gallery erupted in sustained applause that sounded like justice finally getting its day in court. 6 months later, justice had been served with all the trimmings. Diane Fletcher was sentenced to 3 years federal prison for RICO violations, plus an additional 2 years state prison for embezzlement and harassment. Sentences that would run consecutively, not concurrently. The judge's words still echo in my mind like a victory anthem. "Mrs. Fletcher, you used your position of trust to terrorize your own community for personal profit. This court finds your actions particularly egregious given your targeting of military families and vulnerable residents." The financial justice was equally satisfying. Diane was ordered to pay $340,000 in restitution for HOA fund theft, plus damages that left her financially destroyed. My insurance settlement came to $85,000 for property damage and harassment. The HOA members recovered every stolen penny through asset seizure and insurance claims. Pinnacle Development paid a $50,000 settlement for conspiracy participation rather than face federal charges themselves. But the real victory was watching our neighborhood transform from a surveillance state into an actual community. The authoritarian HOA was dissolved and replaced with the Willowbrook Community Alliance, a voluntary association focused on cooperation instead of control. We established term limits, financial transparency, and revolutionary concept of actual democracy. The smell of fear that had hung over our streets for years was replaced by the sweet scent of freedom and freshly baked cookies from block party planning meetings. Property values didn't just stabilize after Diane's removal. They soared 22% as word spread about our transformation. 3 families who'd been desperately planning escapes decided to stay and invest in major improvements. Mrs. Rodriguez expanded her rose garden into a neighborhood showcase that attracts garden club tours. The young couple on the corner started a family instead of fleeing to another state, and their baby's laughter now fills the air where Diane's threats once echoed. My personal growth caught me completely off guard. Speaking at city councils and testifying before state legislature about HOA reform turned me into an accidental advocate for homeowner rights. The Homeowner Defense Scholarship Fund established has provided legal support for over 300 families fighting similar harassment nationwide. Watching other GN face federal charges never gets old. It's like Christmas morning every time another HOA dictator gets handcuffed. The relationship front improved dramatically, too. Turns out standing up to systematic corruption while maintaining grace under pressure is incredibly attractive to the right kind of people. I met Sarah, an environmental lawyer, at our community garden volunteer day. She was initially drawn to my native plant landscaping, the same landscaping that triggered Diane's original harassment. And our shared values of justice and environmental stewardship blossomed into something beautiful. My daughter Zoe thrives in our transformed neighborhood, surrounded by honorary aunts and uncles who genuinely care about each other's well-being. She proudly tells her school friends about her dad's victory over the crazy lady who tried to steal our house. And her confidence in standing up to bullies makes me prouder than any military combination ever could. Our case sparked nationwide HOA reform. The Homeowner Protection Act passed in our state makes HOA embezzlement a felony with mandatory minimums. Real estate license requirements were strengthened to prevent conflicts of interest. Federal investigations in 12 other states uncovered similar schemes leading to 47 arrests and millions in recovered funds for victimized homeowners. Our annual Freedom Festival has become the city's largest community event, drawing over 500 attendees who want to experience what functional neighborhood cooperation looks like. The sound of children playing safely mingles with live music and the sizzle of community barbecues. Local officials bring visiting delegations to see our community association model in action. But the most profound change was personal. Standing in my garden on quiet evenings, breathing in the fragrance of wild flowers, and listening to genuine laughter instead of whispered fears, I understand something fundamental about the power of refusing to be broken by petty tyrants who mistake authority for character. Mrs. Rodriguez recently called about her cousin in Phoenix, another veteran widow facing HOA harassment and property seizure threats. When she asked if I'd help with consultation and evidence gathering, my answer was immediate. Pack your bags, Sarah. We've got another Karen to take down. Because here's the truth. Bullies survive by keeping victims isolated and afraid. They crumble when communities unite and fight back with documentation, legal knowledge, and unwavering determination. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and the craziest ones become our next deep dives. Smash that subscribe button for HOA Tales and ring the notification bell, because we're building an army against suburban tyranny, one documented case at a time. Remember, when you refuse to be crushed by petty dictators, you're not just saving yourself.